So, have you been in situations where there are people around you and most of them think that they're smarter or superior than you? And therefore, what they try and do is they try to prove their superiority or their smartness. And therefore, they also end up putting down other people. This is a classic situation which is called one-upmanship. And a lot of organizations and teams suffer because of this condition. So, we're going to talk about what are some of the demerits of workplaces which actually see a lot of one-upmanship. And therefore, what is it that we can do in order to address this problem? So one-upmanship is really a psychological problem because in this situation, you're trying to showcase to others that you know everything, or perhaps you have better quality of ideas, thoughts, and knowledge as compared to other people. And therefore, it naturally has some severe consequences in any workplace. So what are some of the demerits or disadvantages of having one-upmanship at the workplace? Number one, one-upmanship gives rise to what we call as a toxic work culture. And it's very natural, isn't it? Because everyone is trying to prove that, look, I know better than you, or I'm smarter than you. And by virtue of that, I am superior to you. And imagine if bulk of the people in a meeting try and do this. The result is that you have a situation which goes really out of hands. Sometimes discussions never end because everyone is trying to prove that he or she knows the best. So it really gives rise to a place where people start vitiating the atmosphere rather than reaching to a conclusion on any point which is being discussed. That's one of the major demerits of one-upmanship, is a toxic work culture. The second thing that happens because of one-upmanship is that it destroys psychological safety. Now, psychological safety is a situation where people are absolutely fearless to speak their heart out. Suppose I disagree with you. I would clearly tell you that, look, I disagree with you because of XYZ reasons or because of the data that I've got. But when you see that there is a situation of one-upmanship and people are trying to pull each other down, then people are reluctant to speak openly. There is no transparency whatsoever. And people are very opaque in the way they speak, and sometimes even subdued, subservient, or even fearful. And that's why one of the reasons we need to rectify a situation of one-upmanship is because we want to preserve psychological safety and not allow it to destroy itself. So that's the second problem. Number three is that it automatically reduces collaboration and cooperation. Now, that's a natural consequence, isn't it? Because if you see that everyone in the room is a snake trying to bite and trying to hog the limelight, you are also not wanting to share what you want to share. And you're not wanting to collaborate with others because you're trying to have a competitive spirit, which is, of course, unhealthy, not the right way. And the same is true for everyone else. Everyone believes that the only way to survive and flourish in an environment of insecurity is to hog the limelight and is to destroy any possibility of collaboration, because the only thing that you're thinking is, how do I compete? How do I prove that my idea is better than yours, or my way of thinking is superior to yours? And therefore, there is no possibility of cooperation or collaboration in a situation of one-upmanship. Number four, it tends to diminish any trust whatsoever. Why would you trust anybody in a room full of people where everyone is trying to say, I'm the smartest, I'm the boss, I know everything, and you have no idea about what I'm talking about? So in a situation like that, trust is the first thing that goes out of the window. And a lot of teams suffer because of that, because you naturally look at each other with eyes of suspicion. You tend to look at every idea with a lot of skepticism. And you don't want to trust others because they don't trust you, and therefore you can't trust them back. So one of the major hindrances that is created by one-upmanship is a situation of complete mistrust, and there is breach of cooperation. Therefore, nobody is wanting to believe in anyone. Last but not the least, it tends to adversely impact decision-making, because in one-upmanship, we are not looking at what is right. We're looking at who is right, and everyone is wanting to be right. So I wouldn't share an idea because I think it's a better idea. I would share an idea because I think it's the best idea possible, and it is much better than anyone else can share in the room. So I would want my idea to win, even at the expense of the fact that the team may not find it useful or interesting or worthy of being discussed. So in a situation like that, in an environment like that, decision making takes a backseat because we are all trying to prove my thought process is correct, my idea is the best. And therefore, rather than looking at what can be done best, we try to see who is better and who is bigger and who has more gray cells. So all in all, one-upmanship is something that we might want to look at very, very seriously. It's one of those situations which are often swept under the carpet, but it is not something that we can stay there for a long period of time, and it will start smelling foul sooner than later. So what do we do in order to address one-upmanship? Here are a few recommendations that you may want to adopt in your situation. Number one, as an individual, you need to have a lot of checks and balances to make sure that you don't fall prey to one-upmanship. The first thing you do is to practice more of asking questions rather than telling. So you might have a great idea, but before you share your idea, try to get a sense of the discussion that's happening in the room. Ask relevant questions so that you get more information around it. Being curious about what is being discussed is a great way of curbing your instinct of one-upmanship. So ask more and talk less, and perhaps you may want to share your ideas later. So hold on to them rather than trying to force them down the throat of the entire forum. Number two is to recognize others' contribution. You always want to recognize other people's contribution. Now, what does that mean? Let's say, for example, if some person has shared an idea, you may want to build upon that by saying, well, that's a great idea, but I think it's not adequate. What if we also do this along with what you've suggested? How do you find that? So you build on others' ideas, which is also a way of recognizing their initial contribution, and then you're complementing that with your thought process. So recognize others' ideas rather than suppressing that or putting people down. Number three, know your intent. So whenever you're sharing a suggestion or whenever you're asking a question, ask yourself, what is the intent of doing this? Am I doing this because I think it's a better idea? Or am I doing this to make myself look smarter? Right? So if the answer is you're trying to look smarter, then perhaps that's not the right intent. So knowing your intent behind sharing a suggestion or asking a question is a great way to audit yourself and make sure that you don't fall into the trap of one-upmanship. That's a great way to evaluate your own objective before you speak or before you ask. Number four, practice active listening. Now, this sounds very obvious, but it's half the battle. If you listen intently to what others in the room have to say, then perhaps you will see that a lot of times you don't necessarily have to speak and share your ideas. You can acknowledge other ideas and you can build upon it, but you don't always have to speak up and tell people that this is what I think needs to be done, unless you really have something worth sharing or something which is truly credible or earth-shattering. So practice active listening so that you understand what is the sense of the room, what is the meeting progressing with, what is the direction of our discussion, and so on and so forth. Last but not the least, and I think this is mighty important in order to build trust and cooperation and to kill one-upmanship, is to make sure that you celebrate other people's success in your team. Now, when I say your team, not necessarily just your department or function, but anyone for that matter. So if you see that someone has done exceptionally well and that idea took off and that led to some advantage to the organization or to the forum, then it's an opportunity for you to applaud and talk about it. But talking openly about others' contribution and recognizing their contribution and celebrating their contribution and success, you can automatically remove the spirit of one-upmanship from the room and make it much more open, transparent, and jovial. So these are a few recommendations that you may want to adopt. So I'm going to share the recommendations with you again. Number one, ask questions more rather than talking. So don't tell, but ask more. Number two, recognize other people's contribution. It could be in the form of a question or an idea that they have shared, which is useful. Number three, know your intent really well. What is the purpose for which I'm sharing or I'm asking a question? Number four, practice active listening. And last but not the least, celebrate other people's success. If you do these things well, then I'm sure it will lead to an atmosphere where people have mutual respect, cooperation, a sense of camaraderie prevails, and you will see that you don't even need to prove that you're smarter. Perhaps a way to prove that you're smarter is by sharing quality ideas that take your team and your organization ahead. But you don't have to put an effort to make yourself look smarter. In fact, when you do that, you actually start looking like a fool, like an idiot. So best avoid that. So I hope these ideas will keep you in good stead. So if you are experiencing one-upmanship at your workplace, perhaps you might put these into practice to curb that one-upmanship in your workplace and make it a much more better, open, and jovial environment so that you can all enjoy the fruits of success. Thank you for listening.